Good evening, everyone. As we reach the last few days of our celebrations, we move our focus to Shiva, the Lord of Transformation, which is the topic Gitanjali ji will be talking about today. Gitanjali ji is a social entrepreneur and educationist. After having founded several businesses and social ventures, she has set up the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives in Ladakh as its founding CEO and dean. Geetanjali ji is also the founder of TransformationIndia.com, a collective initiative in line with the forces of evolution to build new social, economic, and political models in line with India's spirit, ethos, and culture. Geetanjali ji is a spiritual seeker with a deep interest in Indian spirituality. She is a lifelong student of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, Sanskrit, Veda, and Upanishads, and strives to apply her learnings gleaned from these texts to indigenize existing education frameworks. If you have any questions, we'll be putting the chat box open towards the end of the session and we will take them if we have time. Over to you, Geetanjali.
Introduction to the session today. So we are going to talk about Shiva, and what better day than to talk about him on Ekadashi today? And when in 2 days we have Mahashivratri. Uh, as a child growing up in India, I was introduced to all the godheads like Krishna, Shiva, Durga, whose photographs would adorn our living room. And as I grew up, there were many stories of Krishna that one heard in textbooks, or it was part of daily storytelling at home. But Shiva to me came a little later in life. It was only in 2014 that a friend forwarded a link of a series, an audiovisual series that got me interested in knowing about Shiva and also reading about him. This was, and also studying the Shiv Puran. And from a person who loved Krishna, it was very natural that I began to love Shiva as well. And this is the story that I like to tell you today, that who are Krishna and Shiva, and how do they work for the evolution in this world, and how did I connect with both of them. So Shiva is known as Adi Yogi. He's also an accomplished dancer, a singer. As a child, I had several interests. Apart from interest in academics and spirituality, I also was interested in dance and martial arts and music and all of that. And I couldn't find anybody who shared all my interests. There wasn't any another person who had interests in all the things that I had. And that is where I was looking for a role model. That how can this be that there isn't another person that I can share all these with? So I had different groups of friends, my martial arts friends, my dance friends, and my Veda and Upanishad friends, and so on. But in 2015, when I started watching this series and started reading about Shiva, I found in him the role model that I was always seeking. He was an accomplished dancer, Nataraj. He was an accomplished singer. He was the knower of the Vedas, yoga. He was the warrior, and he was everybody and everything. And by then, I was already steeped deeply into the studies of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And to me, anything had to be referred to them and to understand in their light. So I tried to find out who is Shiva in Sri Aurobindo's thinking and light. And that is when I came across a certain line where Mother, I think, has said that Shiva is the Lord of transformation. And that was a big shift in my life because everything fell into place. And how? That is what I'll share with you today. So before going further, let me go back to the very start, the beginning of creation, to understand who is Shiva. Let us go back to this beginning of creation, and this is beautiful story that the mother always told the students of the ashram, that when the Supreme decided to exteriorize himself so that he can be many, he can objectivize himself and see himself in many things, the first exteriorization he did was of knowledge and power. And this knowledge consciousness began its work, and there were four beings, divine beings, that emanated from the Supreme to create this world. And these were consciousness in light, bliss, truth, and life. And sometimes Mother also combined bliss and love, truth and life. These were the mighty supreme beings, who were they were given the conditions of joy and freedom, which was essential for this manifestation, and these were emanated to create the worlds. Work independent of each other and became their opposites. So consciousness in light became ignorance and darkness. Bliss became suffering. Truth turned into falsehood, and life, or Sat, turned into death. And then there was absolute chaos, because this is how world became into atoms and matter, and it was absolute chaos. And the creative force which emanated these four beings, it witnessed what was happening and then turned to the Supreme and prayed for the remedy and the cure of this evil. That what can be done now? And she was given the command by the Supreme that she has to project a portion of herself, a greater consciousness, which brings in more love, more truth than these four emanations, to go back into this inconscient. And so this greater consciousness, it came into this inconscient matter, and that is what was the first avatar, and that is what we call Agni. And that is the spark of love, the power of love, that began to bring everything together again. And this spark of love is the spark of the transcendent, and came to be known in the Vedas as the Agni, the divine will. It is the first avatar, the immortal among mortals. And it was because of this that matter again began to aspire for and evolve and grow towards the Supreme. And this Agni in the Vedas is actually the son of Rudra. So now to come back to Shiva and Rudra, in the Vedas, we do not have the mention of the word Shiva. It is a later Puranic tradition coinage of the word. In the Vedas, we have Rudra. Rudra, and there are 3 hymns dedicated to Rudra in the Vedas. And Agni is the son of Rudra. And that is when it struck me that the Agni, the son of Rudra, which is the cause of this evolution, the cause of this progress back to the Supreme, is fathered by Rudra. And therefore, Rudra is the Lord of transformation. because this matter has to finally reach the state of the Supreme. And this is Shiva, who we are going to talk about today. So, this Shiva or Rudra of the Vedas is actually the involved Godhead, the transcendental being who is involved in his aspect of power in the world. And Agni is his son. Agni is the divine will. And Rudra is the divine power in the substance, seeking its own divinity in the world. And therefore, Shiva becomes the Lord of transformation. And it is so interesting to see that we know that in 1926, Mother has written in Agenda that how Shri Krishna fused into Sri Aurobindo. And that is what we celebrate as the Overmental Day in 1926. But when Mother was working on her body, and when we call transformation, it is this transformation of this physical, which is prone to death and decay, to immortality. And when Mother was working on her cells, the cells of the body, she experienced this physical ego, which was very difficult to dissolve. And that's when she invoked Shiva. And she writes in the Agenda that Shiva appeared and he was huge. He was as big as the room. And he was of red and gold color, in red and gold. And Mother was also as tall as him, and she was resting her head on his shoulder. And then she asked him, but unlike Krishna, who fused in Sri Aurobindo and became part of him, Shiva refused to come now, but he said that when your work is done, that is when I will come. But when she asked for the boon to dissolve the physical ego, he granted that boon. But later on, when she mentioned this to Sri Aurobindo said that it is too early, because then she felt that she didn't exist anymore in the body. She was physically all over, and so that boon was also dissolved. But it is important at this point to know that what Shiva meant when he said that when the work is over, he will come. And that is where we go back to some other words or works of Sri Aurobindo, which he has noted in his records of yoga. It's a very interesting story or images that he had, which he has written about, is that when evolution happens, when from animal we became humans, from monkeys, there was an intermediary species called the Vanara. The Vanaras, which did not exist on earth as evolutionary beings, but they were sent from another plane to assist the apes to become man. And if you study Shiv Puran, it is Hanuman who was the Vanara. He was the Bhakta of Ram who came to help Ram. Now, Ram is a part of the story of Dashavatar. And we just understand the story of Dashavatar first a little bit to understand how Shiva aids transformation and evolution at every step. So we know the story. The Vishnu Puran has this concept of Dashavatar, where from a fish, um, there is the first avatar is the fish, and then there is a turtle, and then there is finally um, a physical man, Vamana, Narasimha, Ram, and Krishna, and then Kalki is supposed to be 10th. What these represent are the evolutionary stages, the Dashavatar. And when Ram came on earth after Parshuram, it was an evolution from the vital man, that was Parshuram, to a mental sattvic man. And for that transition to happen, the help was provided by uh, Hanuman in the form of a Vanara. And in Shiv Puran, if we see that Hanuman is called Rudransh, he's the son of Shiva. Shiva projected a part of himself and created Hanuman. And that Hanuman was the link, the bridge between the transition to the, to man as we know him today, the mental sattvic man, the Vanaras. So Vanaras in one of the Manvantaras were a species, and they were projections of Shiva. So when Shiva tells the mother that I will come, when the work is done, this again shows that Shiva is through his son Agni, the cause of this evolution upward, and is always assisting it. And why is this important? Because the whole story of this universe or this creation is the story of involution, of this descent, the initial descent, where the Supreme exteriorizes himself by self limitation at every step and becomes matter. And then there is an ascent where matter has to finally become the Supreme by ascending on these ladders. But aided by this initial spark of love, which is a portion of the transcendental mother. But this upward movement, even though it is aided by Agni, is not enough, and therefore from time to time we have these avatars who descend and create that next ladder so that the next step of evolution is possible. So to me, Vishnu represents this help from above that comes and which has set up the worlds and this descent into matter. And Shiva represents the upward evolutionary surge. So Vishnu represents the involution, and the and Shiva represents this evolution. And that is why, while Vishnu is in the Puranas, so what happened in the Puranas is that the Vedic knowledge, in Vedas there is a mention of Vishnu and Rudra, but very few hymns. There are more hymns to Agni and to Indra, for instance. But as Sri Aurobindo says, the number of hymns do not imply that those godheads are more important. If there are less hymns to Rudra and Vishnu, it does not mean that they are lesser gods. It only means that for the psychological evolution of man through spirituality, Agni and Indra are what aid that help to happen directly, and Vishnu and Rudra, they are supporting in the background. So there are 3 hymns to Rudra and few to Vishnu, and these are Vedic godheads. So Vishnu represents this involved being, and Shiva is this evolutionary help through Agni, and therefore he is the Lord of transformation. So every time there is a new evolution that happens, it is Shiva who is behind it. And now the next stage of our evolution after man has come is the Superman, the supramental consciousness. And that is where, again, Shiva would be there to help us because he is the Lord of transformation. And this has also been beautifully brought out in the vision Mother had of the ship. On the ship, when the people who are preparing for a supramental life are taken in this supramental ship and they reach a shore, Mother says there are these beings who do not belong to this earth, but they have come from somewhere and they are accepting the humans who have grown to the stage where they can be supramentalized. And yet there are some who show some grayish patches and they are sent back. So who are these tall beings who do not resemble humans? They are the counterparts, the Vanara counterparts. So when humans came, what the Vanaras were, these beings is what is needed for the supramental beings to come. And just as Shiva sent out a portion of himself in the form of Hanuman as a Vanara, as that in between, um, species from above. Vanaras are not evolutionary beings. They were sent from above to aid the transition from apes to man. Similarly, Shiva would be there present, as he said to the mother, I'll come when the work is done. He'll be there when we are ready to cross over to the next evolutionary stage. And to me, this was a revelation. How this was how I could combine the beauty of Shiv Puran and Sri Aurobindo's yoga. What role does Shiva play in the evolutionary yoga of Sri Aurobindo? And it was so beautiful to me that my Ishta Devata, because he represents the soul in us, Krishna, and that is where the first opening has to come. But once the soul has opened, our yoga, integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo, is not about nirvana. It is not about moksha or liberation into the Atman and to the Satchidananda. It is to transform mind, life, and body, and to make kingdom of heaven here on earth. And that is when both Shiva and Vishnu working together is what causes this entire journey to happen. And then I was just thinking about it, how every time there is when Dashavatar came, it was always it was Vishnu along with Lakshmi, who came as Ram and Sita, and they would always come together as the avatars to help the next stage of evolution. But this time we had Sri Aurobindo and the mother who came together. And Sri Aurobindo is can be said to be the 10th avatar, the Kalki avatar of Vishnu, to take it to the next stage of evolution. And Mother, the Mahashakti, the Adya Shakti, can be considered Shiva's Shakti, So at this crucial time of Earth, where we are looking at supramental transformation, it was so interesting to see when it struck me one day that Mother and Sri Aurobindo coming together is like again Vishnu and Shiva coming together, because this time the next evolutionary leap, which is mind boggling, from this body, which is made of flesh and bones, and which is prone to death and decay and suffering, is aspiring for immortality, where it would change its texture from this flesh and bones and blood to a body of light. And that is when, again, Vishnu and Shiva have to work together to make this happen. And very beautifully, Sri Aurobindo, here Krishna flutes upon the forest road, and here Shiva sits ash smeared with matted hair, but Shiva and Krishna are the single God. In us too, Krishna seeks for love and joy. In us too, Shiva struggles with the world's grief. One self in all of us endures annoy, cries in his pain and asks his fate's relief. So both Shiva and Krishna, Sri Aurobindo says, are the single God. One supporting from above and one aiding from below. Yes, Deepa. Generally, Indian spirituality has been the merging of the individual self or the ego with the Atman, the self as capital, which is that oneness, and which merges with Satchidananda and infinite, and which is called the experience of nirvana or moksha, where the being then becomes one with Satchidananda or the the unmanifest, and so on. So this has been one approach to spirituality, and it was the later approach post Vedanta. But the Vedic aim, in the Vedic times, the aim of spirituality was life affirming spirituality. It was not escape through nirvana and not participating in manifestation anymore, but it was, while being here on earth, how can we live that life of freedom and liberation? And that is what is the concept of the Vedic sacrifice. Unfortunately, later on it came to be known as Karma Kanda, but Vedic sacrifice symbolically means life. And all that we pour into it, the ghee, the purified butter, is actually our purified thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And the beautiful smell, the perfume that is generated out of that sacrifice is actually the goodness, that we, because we have purified our body, emotions, and mind in the light of higher consciousness, and the actions that we do through our thought, feeling, and words, it spreads that goodness. So that is the perfume of the sacrifice. So life as a sacrifice was the symbol of the Vedic times. It was here on earth that liberation had to be sought. It was not after death, it was in life that liberation had to be sought. But we lost that knowledge, and therefore the Vedic sacrifice, which was combined in that act of sacrifice, which was karma, the understanding, knowledge was already there, and it was together done. But later on, it became separate paths of knowledge and works and bhakti, of Vedanta, of Tantra, and so on. But that is what Mother and Sri Aurobindo have brought again back together, that the aim of yoga is not an escape from life, but it is to make life better. And how to make life better? What is the problem that we face today? So the problem that we face today is the four beings that I mentioned having become opposite. So today there is suffering because bliss became suffering. Today we have ignorance because the consciousness became darkness. Today we have falsehood because truth became falsehood. And today we have death because life became death. So life, consciousness, bliss, and truth is nothing but Sat, Chit, Ananda, and Supermind, Vijnana. So Satchidananda and Supermind, these four, which is the upward triangle, and the fourth one is Supermind, it became the opposite, which is mind, life, and body, or death, suffering, and falsehood. And therefore, the way out is not escaping. It is not, let's say there's a cricket match and we decide to quit the match and go and sit in the pavilion. That is one way of, escaping from the stress of the result of the game, that you decide not to play. And that is liberation or moksha. You escape into the Atman and into the Satchidananda. But what Sri Aurobindo and Mother want us to do is to bring back the Vedic spirituality, which is staying in the game, playing cricket, but with a liberated state of being, not playing to win or lose, but playing to express the higher consciousness in all that we do. So to become centers of this consciousness here on earth is why this whole world was created. Otherwise, what's the point of the divine creating such diversity, such beauty? You look at flora, there are millions of species. You look at fauna, there are millions of species of animals. Everywhere there's beauty. If you look at stars, there are millions of stars. You look at galaxies, there are millions of galaxies. I mean, if the purpose was to escape from all this, then why would the divine create all this? So the purpose is not mukti, as Sri Aurobindo says. In the state of mukti, to enjoy. Bhukti is the aim actually. You'll be surprised to know. But the aim of life is not mukti, liberation. But the final state is bhukti. But when is bhukti possible? Bhukti is only possible when we have mukti. Like in the Isha Upanishad, it is said, Tena tyaktena bhunjitha. By renouncing all, enjoy all. Because unless you're renounced, you actually cannot enjoy. Because when you don't have something, you will always be restless to have it. And once you have it, if you're not renounced inwardly, once you have it, you have the fear of losing it. So both when you don't have it and when you have it, you cannot enjoy truly. To enjoy, you have to be in that inner state of liberation. And that is bhukti. Bhukti is enjoyment, but divine enjoyment. So what is coming in the way of divine enjoyment today? Is death, disease, ignorance, suffering, falsehood. This is coming in the way. And the way, as I said, is not to escape playing the game itself, but playing it well, playing it right. And that's what the mother was trying to do. That the biggest um, suffering is the suffering of death. And the mother says this is the biggest falsehood we are living with. It's just because we don't know how to live. It is possible that this very body, it can be evolved into the next state of supramental consciousness when this body will not die. And the mother was like every avatar, they are born with all our human limitations, but through their example, they evolve and show us how it can be done. And so when the mother was working on her physical, and that is what she has chronicled, which is chronicled in the agenda, how she was working step by step. So after she reached the supramental consciousness, that is the first step, the yoga of ascent. And this is the yoga of ascent, which is described in Savitri as Ashwapati's yoga. How from where we are today, from the mind, we go to higher mind and illumined mind and intuitive mind and overmind and supermind. Having reached there, how do we purify all our layers right up to our physical so that that supermind can be expressed through our very lowest parts, which is the mind, life, and body. So when finally the supermind can be expressed through the body will not die as we know it. It would be a very different kind of a body. So when we know that when mental consciousness came on earth, the animal body was not enough, was not sufficient to express mental consciousness, because mind can look at truth in all directions, right? Whereas animal does things instinctively. So you see animals mostly walking on their fours. But for the mind to be there, the body had to be different. We're different from animals. We can stand erect. We can look at all directions. So theory of evolution of Sri Aurobindo is different from that of Darwin, because Darwin, it is physical evolution. But Sri Aurobindo says it is consciousness that evolves, and the physical transforms itself to support that evolved state of consciousness. And so when we are now aspiring and evolving towards the supramental consciousness, this body, as we know it, is not sufficient to express supramental consciousness. So this body will transform so that it can hold the supramental consciousness. And it is Lord Shiva who is the Lord of this transformation, who is helping. And that is when Mother invoked him, he came. He also gave, and he said that he will come when once the work is done. So that is a very long talk in itself, Deepa, Mother's journey of physical transformation. But that is what the mother was doing till the very end. And we discussed this in the other session. This is very interesting, that how, therefore, if you see Shiva, okay, there is nothing that he cannot do. Okay, as I said, he can sing, he can dance. He's even a doctor, Bajnath. He's a warrior. He's the knowledge of the Vedas. And that is the next part of my talk that I would like to tell you. That for the next step in evolution, why Shiva is my role model, and he can be all our role model, is because any type, any type cannot express the supramental consciousness. So we cannot say that, I'm just an engineer and I don't know much, or I'm a humanities person and don't understand maths, or I'm a dancer and I cannot sing. So the education for the future is preparing ourselves to be plastic, to be so resilient that we are not reflecting any one type, that we can be everything. It is the moment, whatever the moment demands of us to discharge a particular duty, we can do that. If it is required that I need to drive from here to Delhi, I should be able to do that. Okay. If requires that I need to understand the Vedas, I should be able to do that. And that is what is integral yoga. That on one hand, we identify the psychic being. And this psychic being is nothing but this spark that initially the transcendental mother sent, the divine presence, the psychic presence in matter, and which has evolved over millions of years and is today present in our heart as the psychic being. It is in not these three dimensions. In the fourth dimension, in the Kathopanishad, it is mentioned as the Angushtamatra Purusha, the psychic being, which is what is the leader of the journey. Agni Mele Purohitam. It is a Purohit, that which can lead us. That is the first step. And the second step is having an idea or a fleeting experience of this psychic transforming or educating our mind, life, and body. That is why Mother and Shiva Bindu talk about integral education. So they talk about physical education, vital education, mental education, psychic education, and spiritual education. These are five pillars of education. And what is the meaning of this? Why does Mother give so much importance to this education? Is because we have to become like Shiva. We have to be able to do everything. The physical has to be resilient, it has to be strong, it has to be flexible, it has to be skilled, it should be able to do everything, because it is the basis, the temple. All the realizations and siddhis have to be finally expressed through the body, through the physicality. And that is why physical education is important. Vital education is important. Education of the emotions, the seat of the power and the will in us. It has to be purified. It has to be, we should be capable of all kinds of, energy that is needed, all kinds of emotions. On one hand, we have to be strong and courageous. On the other hand, very sensitive, and sweet. And so sweetness and strength, all these opposite qualities of the feelings and emotions have to be developed in us, because on one hand we can be a warrior if needed and display courage, and the physical is ready, it has learned the skills, the vital is ready, it has all the courage, it has been trained not to have fear. And on the other hand, we can be a servant with all the love and compassion and servitude. uh, Warrior on one hand, this on the other. So similarly, the growth of the mind, we have to the education of the mind, not to have prejudices, not to have particular points of view, to have a wide acceptance of all the various ideas, of all the cultures and all the countries in the world, because everything has a place for everything, and everything in its place is the basis of harmony, as the mother calls it. And that is why in the Vedas it is said that the time has now come, and that is why Sri Aurobindo also and the mother bring this um, the fourfold or fivefold education of the being, is that we have to become Chatur Varnya. We had in India these varnas. Varnas are colors, and they are not caste, which later on became caste, but they were actually varnas. Varnas means color. Color means that temperaments. So we had people who had the temperament of the Brahmin. They sought knowledge. They worked with the mind. Okay, we had people who were warriors, kshatriyas. Their temperament was valor, courage, fighting for a cause larger than themselves. We had the Vaishyas, whose color or temperament was mutuality. It was to make things, to share, give and take, mutuality, harmony of that, the basis of material and vital existence. They provided that basis. And the Shudras. The Shudras were those who worked finally with matter and who finally executed everything. So in the past, and even today, we are all maybe born with a particular temperament or a particular varna. I may be somebody who may be, good in production and distribution or in mutuality, or I may be seeking knowledge. But to become supramental, we have to become Chaturvarnya. We have to become Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra all in one. We have to be seeking knowledge. Our mind has to be wide. We have to be capable of holding power. We have to be the Kshatriya element. We have to have mutuality, and harmony, production and consumption, and the ability to sustain oneself, livelihood, and Shudra, the spirit of service, to give oneself to for the world to be held. So Shiva is that role model where in one being we find that everything is possible. Just because you're a warrior and have courage and power and strength does not mean you will not have the sensitivity of a singer, or of a, if you have the knowledge of the Vedas as a Brahmin, it's not that you will not have the practicality of a doctor or somebody who can cure you. So you can be all in one. And as a child, I could not fit into any one of the things. I had all these interests, and I used to think that I am abnormal because I didn't have anybody whom I could share all my interests with. And that is why when I found Shiva, and before Shiva, Da Vinci. Da Vinci was a sculptor, an anatomist, and in the Renaissance period, we had people who had many qualities. And now Shiva, who's eternally there. He is the eternal, the Jyotihi. He is Anadi and Anand. He is without beginning, without end. And he is everything. He is Ashutosh. He gives us all that we need in our. So you see, on one hand, he cannot tolerate injustice. He is the Rudra. He can destroy. On the other hand, he's Ashutosh. He melts. He's Bholenath. He's so naive and sweet that anybody asks him of any boon, he can be that. So somebody who can be both soft and be called Ashutosh and be a Rudra or a warrior, who can be a dancer, who can be this. So can be our finest role model because he is the Lord of transformation. And the next step of our evolutionary journey is this transformation from being human to being superhuman, Superman in Sri Aurobindo's terminology, which is somebody who's free from any typal expressions and being, one who can be everything and do everything. And that is why Shiva is the Lord of transformation who aids us from below. And when we invoke him and we become like him, and he also is the he grants immortality, the Mahamrityunjaya mantra. He is the only one actually who can grant this immortality and who can take us to this supramental state. And so that is where I would like to end. I am very, very fond of Shiva, and I thought that I would talk about him. Um, uh, yeah, I have a lot of love for Shiva, and he is to me not different from Krishna, as Sri Aurobindo's poem told. He's not different from Sri Aurobindo and the mother. And these are all different forms that come in different space and time, depending on the spirit of the times, to help us evolve towards our final state of liberation and expression. So, Deepa had asked me to pause at 40 to 45 minutes so that I can take up questions. And that's what I will.
Okay. Hi. Okay. So I have got one question, Gitanjali ji.
Yes.
So the question is any of this transformation that you just spoke about possible without Shakti?
Mm. So Shiva and Shakti, it is they are always together. So no, it cannot be, because Shakti is what. So Prakriti, when it is transformed, is Shakti, right? So it is both the path and the goal. That is the beauty of it. You know, it is said that one who chooses the infinite has been chosen by the infinite. So when we start on this path, actually the path itself is the transformation, and it takes you there. No, it is so Shakti is also the one that aids, and Shakti is also the goal. And Shakti, the effect of Shakti in us grows in proportion to the faith that we have in the grace of the Shakti. Does it answer your question?
Gitanjali ji, it answered the question. And there's one more question. So this question is, you said that you need a physically strong body for spiritual development. But when you go to temples, or when you see saints, the older sages and saints, they're always depicted as people who are very thin, who are very weak, and um, in the sculptures you will be able to see their rib cage. In the drawings you're able to see their bones, and so they aren't physically very fit. But how is it that they are so spiritually fit?
So it is. You can switch on, keep your video on, Pushkar. It helps me to look at you and talk. So in different times, different depictions happen. So if you look at the Sapta Rishis, or if you look at the older Rishis, or even gurus like Dronacharya and others, they are not just knowledgeable and spiritually realized, but they are also physically very strong, right? But in the later times, when the whole pursuit became an escape from life, then this body and matter was considered as an obstacle, not as an aid, because the the shift happened from expressing God on earth to, as I said, sitting in the pavilion and not playing cricket. Okay? So when you have to escape the life through liberation, and you don't have to work here with that consciousness, you don't need to be strong. So the depictions you talk about is of later period in India, when matter was denied, to be developed. Okay? But the original Vedic vision was to develop the body. And even in other cultures, if you see, have you heard of kung fu monks, kung fu nuns, and all? Shaolin. Have you heard of the Shaolin temple?
Yeah, I've heard of the Shaolin temple.
Kung fu. So the Shaolin monks, everybody knew kung fu. Why? Because one is that to protect yourself from animals and their attacks, but also when you have to sit for 18 hours for meditation, you should have a spine which is strong, you should have a back that can support you. And also when the siddhis happen, realizations come, if the body is not strong, then people have a chance to go mad or deranged and so on. So when you have to express that consciousness in life, then a strong body is a must. But when that consciousness has to escape into nirvana, a strong body is not necessary. And that is what had happened in the last 2000 years in India.
Very interesting, Gitanjali ji. So there is one more question that I've got, and it is, can you tell us about integral education and how it helps a child, and how it is different from the normal education that we get in school?
So normal education is more about what we call the three H's, 3 R's. It is just teaching you how to read, write, and do arithmetic, right? The normal education is about, it is a fallout of the Industrial Revolution where everybody needed to be literate, to read and write, and to do arithmetic, which all only involve the brain, the head, and that too not completely. You were not taught how to be wise or how to, be how to connect with interconnectedness and so on. Whereas integral education takes the human being not just as the mind, but as an integral being. So, what are the different aspects that we have in us? Apart from the mind, we have emotions, right? We have emotions which are very different from the mind. You know that even if you understand something with your mind, that getting up at 5 in the morning is good, but if the emotions are not helping, the body is not helping, you will just switch off the alarm and go back to sleep, right? So we have another aspect called the emotions, and they need a separate education. There are many students of IITs who commit suicides. They have very high IQ, but the emotions are not developed. They can't handle several things of life. Similarly, we have a body, physical. So even if we are very bright in the head, but if we are diseased and weak, we won't be able to do much. So integral education is taking the integral personality, the body, the emotions, the mind, and this is not all. We also have a soul, a psychic being, which I spoke about. And finding that is the purpose of education, and having that lead the mind, life, and body. And Mother also talks about the fifth, the spiritual education. So the psychic is the divinity in us, and the spiritual self is the self which is higher above and connects everybody. So these are the integral education, which is different from traditional education, which just focuses on the mind, and that to a very limited portion of the mind.
Very interesting again, Gitanjali ji. And so I think this will be the last question. And the question is, do you think teaching students about Indian culture is very important as part of education?
Yes, of course, because this is the not only the oldest living civilization, but also it is a civilization that had answered to most of the questions that today the Western world, through its scientific inquiry, is still, kind of fumbling and trying to understand. So we have a culture where these questions for millennia had been asked and answered. Okay? It is like they say that there's no use to reinvent the wheel when it has already been invented, right? It's better to build something on the wheel. So, if children already the wheel of consciousness and of understanding of interrelatedness of higher purpose of life has been sought in this country for thousands of years, and if we don't understand that or we don't study that, then we are losing a big part of our knowledge and seeking answers in very minimalistic, scientific inquiries. We are kind of reinventing the wheel, whereas we could, the purpose of life, and there are so many beautiful, and once we understand the India's past and its contribution and all the knowledge systems, then we can build on them in the light of Indian culture and ethos, and not just copy the West as we are doing today.
It's a pity that in my school they don't teach me about Indian culture as much as, or in my old school they didn't teach me about Indian culture as much as I would have liked them to teach me. Um, I think those are all the questions that we have today. Thank you very much, Gitanjali ji, for spending this evening with us. Tomorrow
Thank
is the last satsang for Tantrotsav 2021, and Sampadananda Mishra ji will speak about from man animal to man divine.